The cargo bay of Nexus Prime hummed with the sounds of 100 different species going about their business. And the air smelled of engine oil and alien spices from distant worlds. Lucy Grant stood at Inspection Station 7 with a scanner in her hand and a calm expression on her face, checking manifests and verifying cargo like she did every single day. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet and 1 inch tall, with brown hair tied back in a simple ponytail and eyes that held a quiet stillness. Most people never noticed her. Coworker Danny Cole worked at the station beside her, a young man of 23 who had joined the dock crew 6 months ago and still found the alien visitors fascinating. "Big shipment coming in," Danny said as he looked at his datapad. "Krellian military convoy, and you know how they get about inspections." Lucy nodded without looking up from her work, her fingers moving across the scanner with practiced ease. The Krellians were known throughout the galaxy as proud warriors, a species that stood over 8 feet tall with armored scales covering their bodies, and a culture built entirely around strength and combat. They looked down on smaller species, and they looked down on humans most of all. The cargo bay doors slid open with a heavy grinding sound, and a group of Krellians marched inside like they owned the entire station. At their head walked Commander Varax, a massive figure even by Krellian standards. His scales a deep crimson color that marked him as high-born nobility. His golden eyes scanned the cargo bay with obvious disdain, and his clawed hands rested on the ceremonial blade at his hip. Behind him came 6 Krellian soldiers and a hover platform loaded with sealed military crates. Every alien in the cargo bay stopped what they were doing to watch. And even Danny took a step back from his station. Lucy simply continued her work until the Krellians approached her inspection point. "Inspection Station 7, she said in a steady voice. "I will need to see your cargo manifest and verify the contents of your shipment before you can proceed." Commander Varax stopped walking and looked down at her. And then he began to laugh. It was a harsh sound, like rocks grinding together, and his soldiers joined in with rumbling chuckles of their own. "What is this?" Vorax said in a booming voice that echoed through the cargo bay. "They send a tiny creature to inspect a Krellian military shipment?" He leaned down until his massive face was close to Lucy's, his hot breath washing over her. "I have seen insects larger than you." "Human," he said with cruel amusement. "Go find someone of actual importance to handle my cargo." "Little thing." Danny's face turned red with anger, and he stepped forward with his fists clenched. "Hey, you cannot talk to her like that," he said, his voice shaking slightly. Vorax turned his golden eyes toward Danny and sneered. "Another small human comes to defend the tiny one," he said. "How touching, how utterly pathetic." Lucy placed a hand on Danny's arm and gently pushed him back. "It is fine," she said quietly. "Please return to your station." "But Lucy, he cannot just—" "Danny," she said, and something in her voice made him stop. He looked at her face and saw no anger there, no fear, nothing but that strange calm stillness she always carried. He nodded and stepped back. Though his jaw remained tight with frustration, Lucy turned back to Commander Varax and held out her scanner. "Your manifest." "Commander," she said, in the same steady tone. Of Vorax straightened to his full height and crossed his massive arms over his chest. "You still dare to make demands of me?" he said loudly, making sure everyone in the cargo bay could hear. "I am Commander Varax of the Krellian Third Fleet, and I do not answer to creatures I could crush beneath my foot." He gestured at Lucy's small frame with one clawed hand. "Look at this thing," he announced to the watching crowd. "This is what humans send to challenge a Krellian warrior, a female barely larger than a child." Some of the aliens in the crowd laughed nervously, while others simply watched in uncomfortable silence. Vandari merchant in the corner of the bay had gone very still, his 4 eyes fixed on Lucy with an expression of growing recognition. "Impossible," the old merchant whispered to his young assistant. "It cannot be her." His assistant, a Vendari female barely out of adolescence, looked at him with confusion. "What is wrong?" she asked. "Who is that human?" The old merchant did not answer immediately. His eyes still locked on the small woman who stood calmly before the raging Krellian Commander. Lucy simply waited for Varax to finish his display. Her scanner still held out patiently. "You think your size makes you strong," she finally said when the laughter died down. "You think because you are tall and I am small that you are more than me." She paused and looked up at him with those quiet eyes. "I think many things, Commander," she continued, "but I know that your cargo still requires inspection before it can leave this bay." Varax's scales darkened with anger, a sign of extreme displeasure in Krellian body language. "You test my patience, little human," he growled. "I am simply doing my job," Lucy replied. "The manifest, please." For a long moment, the Rax stared at her with barely contained rage. And then he snatched a datapad from one of his soldiers and shoved it toward her. "Take your manifest," he snarled. "And be grateful I do not teach you a lesson about respecting your betters." Lucy took the datapad and began scanning through the contents with calm efficiency. The old Vendari merchant finally moved, grabbing his assistant's arm and pulling her close. "That woman," he said in a hushed voice. "I saw her face on every news broadcast 5 years ago. And I watched the footage of what she did on Kestrel 4. His assistant's eyes went wide. "What do you mean?" she asked. "What did she do?" The old merchant shook his head slowly, his gaze still fixed on Lucy. "That Krellian fool has no idea who he just insulted," he said. "That tiny human woman stood alone against a Titan-class war machine and brought it down with her bare hands." His assistant gasped. "That is impossible," she said. "No single warrior could defeat a Titan." The old merchant turned to look at her with deadly serious eyes. "Let me tell you the story," he said. "Let me tell you about the Battle of Kestrel 4 and the human they call the Giant Killer." The old Vendari merchant settled into his chair and took a deep breath, his 4 eyes distant with memory as his young assistant leaned closer to listen. 5 years ago, he began, the Valorian Empire decided that human colonies were easy targets for expansion, and they launched an invasion that caught everyone by surprise. His assistant nodded slowly, for she had heard stories of the Valorian incursion, but had been too young to truly understand it at the time. "The Valorians were ruthless," the merchant continued. "They deployed weapons that most species had never seen before, including the Titan-class war machines." He shuddered at the memory. "Imagine a walking fortress as tall as a skyscraper," he said, "covered in cannons and protected by energy shields that could stop almost any weapon. And you begin to understand what humans faced on Kestrel 4, 5 years earlier on the farming colony of Kestrel 4. The sky had turned orange with fire, and Smoke Sergeant Lucy Grant crouched behind a collapsed wall with her squad of Marines. Listening to the thunder of explosions in the distance, she was 27 years old, small even by human standards. But she had served in the Terran Defense Force for 6 years and had earned the respect of every soldier under her command. Captain Tyler Brooks knelt beside her, studying a cracked datapad that showed the positions of enemy forces. "They have cut off all escape routes," Tyler said grimly. "The evacuation ships cannot take off while the Titan is operational. And command says reinforcements are at least 3 days away." Lucy looked at her captain, a man she had served under for 4 years, and saw the fear hidden behind his steady expression. "What about the civilians?" she asked. Tyler pointed toward a large building in the distance, a community center that had been converted into a refugee shelter. 2,000 of them, he said. "Mostly children and elderly who could not make it to the primary evacuation point before the Valorians cut us off." Lucy felt her stomach tighten. "We have to protect them," she said. "With what?" Tyler replied, "We have 12 Marines, limited ammunition, and no heavy weapons. and they have an army backed by a Titan-class war machine. Before Lucy could respond, the ground shook with a tremendous impact. They both looked up to see the Titan in the distance. A massive humanoid machine that stood 300 feet tall and bristled with weapons was moving toward the refugee shelter. All units, Tyler said into his communicator, fall back to defensive position around the shelter and prepare to hold the line. Lucy gathered her squad and they ran through the burning streets, dodging debris and the occasional plasma bolt from Valorian ground troops. When they reached the shelter, they found chaos. Civilians were screaming and crying, pressing against the doors and windows to see the approaching horror. Children clung to their parents, and elderly colonists prayed to whatever gods they believed in. Lucy pushed through the crowd and found the other Marine squads already setting up defensive positions. There were 36 of them in total. The last defenders of Kestrel IV. Captain Tyler Brooks stood on an overturned vehicle and addressed his soldiers. I will not lie to you, he said, his voice carrying over the noise. Our chances of survival are small, but those people behind us have no chance at all if we fail. He pointed at the approaching Titan. That machine thinks it is unstoppable, he said. It thinks we are just insects to be crushed beneath its feet. But we are human, and we do not give up. The Marines raised their weapons and shouted in defiance. Lucy felt pride swell in her chest despite the terror that gripped her heart. The battle began moments. Later Valorian ground troops advanced ahead of the Titan. Hundreds of alien soldiers with plasma rifles and energy blades. The Marines opened fire, and the air filled with the crack of kinetic weapons and the hiss of plasma bolts. Lucy fought beside her squad, dropping enemy after enemy with precise shots, but for every Valorian that fell, two more seemed to take its place. The Titan continued its slow advance, its massive feet crushing buildings and vehicles beneath it. Its cannons fired at the Marine positions, and each blast killed or wounded several defenders. Captain Tyler Brooks led a desperate charge against a Valorian flanking maneuver, his rifle blazing as he pushed the enemy back. Lucy watched him fight with the ferocity of a man who had nothing left to lose. Then a plasma bolt struck him in the chest. Captain! Lucy screamed, but it was too late. Tyler Brooks fell to the ground and did not move. The Marines around Lucy faltered, their morale shattered by the loss of their commander. The Valorians pressed their advantage, and the defensive line began to collapse. Lucy looked around at the chaos, at her fellow soldiers dying, at the civilians screaming in terror behind her. She looked at the Titan, now less than a mile away and still advancing. Something inside her went very still and very cold. She was not a captain, not a hero, not anyone special. She was just a small woman from a farming family on Earth who had joined the military to see the stars. But she was the ranking soldier now, and those people needed someone to lead them. Lucy stood up straight and raised her voice above the noise of battle. Listen to me, she shouted. All Marines, listen to me now. The soldiers turned to look at her, this tiny woman standing amid the fire and death. Captain Brooks is gone, she said. But we are still here, and those civilians are still alive, and I will not let them die today. She pointed at the Titan. That thing is a machine, she said. It is big and powerful, but it is still just a machine. And machines can be broken. A Marine named Kevin shouted back at her. How? He demanded. We have nothing that can scratch that monster. Lucy looked at the Titan, studying its massive form, and her mind raced through everything she knew about Valorian technology. Every machine has a weakness, she said slowly, and I am going to find it. She turned to face her fellow soldiers, these brave men and women who had already given so much. Hold the line, she ordered. Buy me time, and I will bring that giant down. The Marines looked at each other, and then back at the small woman who spoke with such absolute certainty. They raised their weapons. You heard the sergeant. Kevin shouted, Hold the line. Lucy nodded once and then turned to study her enemy, her mind already forming a desperate plan. Lucy crouched behind a burning vehicle and studied the Titan. Through the smoke and flames that filled the air, the massive war machine stood 300 feet tall. Its armored body covered in weapons and sensor arrays that tracked every movement on the battlefield. Energy shields shimmered around it like a protective cocoon, deflecting the few rockets the Marines had managed to fire at it. But Lucy was not looking at the shields or the weapons. She was looking at the joints, the gaps in the armor, the places where maintenance crews would need access to repair the machine. Every war machine had a weakness, and she had finally found this one near the base of the Titan's left leg, partially hidden by armored plates. She could see a small hatch with Valorian symbols painted on it, maintenance access point. If she could reach that hatch and plant explosives inside the machine's internal systems, she might be able to bring the whole thing down. It was a suicide mission, and she knew it. The Titan stood over half a mile away, surrounded by enemy troops and constantly firing at the Marine positions. The ground between her and the machine was nothing but open battlefield, cratered and burning and swept by plasma fire. No sane person would attempt such a crossing. Lucy pulled 4 explosive charges from her belt and checked their timers. "Kevin," she called to the Marine nearby. "I need covering fire on my signal." Kevin crawled over to her position, his face covered in dirt and blood from a cut on his forehead. "What are you planning?" he asked. Lucy pointed at the Titan. "I am going to run to that thing, climb up its leg, find the maintenance hatch, and blow it up from the inside." Kevin stared at her like she had lost her mind. "That is impossible," he said. "You will never make it across that field." "Probably not," Lucy agreed. "But I have to try, because if I do not, everyone in that shelter dies." She looked back at the community center, at the faces pressed against the windows, at the children crying for their parents. "Give me covering fire," she said again. "Everything you have got. And do not stop until either I reach that Titan or I am dead." Kevin was silent for a long moment, and then he nodded slowly. "You are the bravest person I have ever met," he said quietly. "No," Lucy replied. "I am just too small to know when to quit." She gave him a brief smile and then turned to face the battlefield. Kevin moved to relay her orders, and within moments, the remaining Marines had repositioned to provide maximum covering fire. Lucy took a deep breath and closed her eyes. She thought of her family back on Earth, her parents and her little brother, who had probably heard by now that Kestrel 4 was under attack. She thought of the children in the shelter, innocent lives that deserved a chance to grow up. She thought of Captain Brooks and all the soldiers who had already died defending this place. Then she opened her eyes, and ran. The world became a blur of fire and noise as Lucy sprinted across. The open ground plasma bolts scorched the air around her, close enough to feel the heat on her skin. The Marines behind her laid down a storm of suppressing fire, drawing the attention of Valorian troops away from her small running figure. A bolt grazed her left arm, and she stumbled but kept running. The Titan loomed larger and larger ahead of her, its massive form blocking out the sky. Its sensors must have detected her approach because one of its secondary cannons swiveled toward her. Lucy dove to the side just as the cannon fired, and the blast threw her through the air like a rag doll. She hit the ground hard and felt something crack in her ribs, but she forced herself back to her feet and kept moving. Another plasma bolt hit her right thigh, and she screamed in pain, but did not stop. The Titan was so close now, only 100 meters away, and she could see the maintenance hatch. Clear-eye Valorian soldiers moved to intercept her, but the Marines cut them down with precise fire. Lucy reached the base of the Titan and grabbed onto the massive armor plates that covered its leg. Her injured arm screamed in protest as she pulled herself up, her fingers finding gaps in the armor to use as handholds. The Titan began to move, Trying to shake her off like a dog shaking off water, Lucy held on with all her strength, climbing higher and higher toward the maintenance hatch. A Valorian inside the machine must have realized what she was doing because the leg she was climbing suddenly jerked violently to the side. Lucy lost her grip and fell. Barely catching herself on a protruding sensor array, she hung there for a moment, her injured body begging her to let go, to fall and let the pain end. But she could hear the children screaming in the shelter behind her. She pulled herself up and kept climbing. Finally, she reached the maintenance hatch and pulled out her combat knife. The hatch was sealed with magnetic locks, but the seams were not designed to resist physical force. Lucy jammed her knife into the gap and pried. With all her remaining strength, the hatch popped open and she crawled inside. Interior of the Titan was hot and filled with the hum of massive machinery. Lucy moved through narrow corridors designed for Valorian technicians. Her small size actually an advantage in the cramped space. She found what she was looking for: a central power conduit that fed energy to the machines. Weapons and shields. She attached all 4 explosive charges to the conduit and set the timers for 30 seconds. There was no way out. The hatch she had entered through was her only exit, and she was deep inside the machine. Now 30 seconds was not enough time to escape. Lucy sat down against the wall and looked at the timer, counting down on the explosives. 25 seconds. She thought about the 2,000 people in the shelter who would live because of what she was about to do. 20 seconds. She thought about the Marines outside who had trusted her with their lives and given her the chance to reach this place. 15 seconds. She closed her eyes and smiled. 10 seconds. The Titan shuddered as something struck it from outside, and Lucy heard alarms blaring throughout the machine. 5 seconds. For the children. She whispered. The explosives detonated. The central power conduit ruptured and sent a chain reaction through the entire machine. The Titan's shields failed. Its weapons went dark, and massive explosions tore through its internal systems. Lucy felt heat and pressure and pain, and then everything went black outside. The Marines watched in stunned silence as the Titan-class war machine shuddered and then collapsed like a falling mountain. It hit the ground with an impact that shook the entire colony, and flames erupted from every joint and opening in its massive body. The Valorian ground troops, seeing their unstoppable weapon destroyed, broke ranks and fled. The battle was over. Kevin was the first to move, running toward the fallen Titan with desperate hope in his heart. He found the maintenance hatch, now half buried in debris and wreckage, and he began to dig. Other Marines joined him, their hands bleeding as they tore away twisted metal and burning components. And there, barely alive, they found Lucy Grant. Her body was broken and burned, but her heart was still beating. She had done the impossible. She had stood alone against a giant and won. The old Vandari merchant paused in his story and took a sip from his water flask, his 4 eyes glistening with emotion. His young assistant sat in stunned silence, her mouth hanging open in disbelief. She survived? The assistant finally asked. How could anyone survive something like that? The merchant shook his head slowly. The doctor said it was impossible, he replied. Her body had suffered burns over 60% of its surface. She had broken 17 bones, and her lungs had been damaged by the smoke and heat. He looked across the cargo bay at Lucy, who continued to calmly inspect the Krellian manifest as if nothing unusual was happening. They kept her in a medical coma for 3 months, he continued, and she spent another 9 months in recovery and rehabilitation after that. The young assistant followed his gaze to the small human woman. A full year of recovery, she said softly. Yes, the merchant confirmed, and during that year, her story spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The news networks had broadcast the footage from Kestrel 4 to every inhabited world. Cameras mounted on marine helmets had captured Lucy's impossible run across the battlefield, her desperate climb up the Titan's leg, and the moment when the massive war machine collapsed billions of beings from thousands of species. Watch the tiny human woman do what entire armies had failed to do. The Terran Defense Force immediately recognized her extraordinary courage. Admiral Chris Lawson himself traveled to the hospital where Lucy was recovering to present her with the Terran Star of Valor, the highest military honor that humanity could bestow. He stood beside her bed, where she lay wrapped in bandages and connected to a dozen medical machines, and he pinned the medal to her pillow. "Sergeant Grant," he said in a voice thick with emotion, "what you did on Kestrel 4 saved 2,000 innocent lives and turned the tide of the entire war." Lucy could barely speak through her damaged throat, but she managed to whisper a response. "I just did my job." "Sir," Admiral Lawson shook his head. "You did far more than that," he said. "You showed the entire galaxy what humans are made of." The story of the Battle of Kestrel 4 spread beyond human space alien. Species who had dismissed humans as weak and insignificant began to reconsider their opinions. The Valorians, who had believed their Titan-class war machines to be invincible, suffered a devastating blow to their morale. How could they win a war against a species that produced warriors like Lucy Grant? Other human forces, inspired by Lucy's sacrifice, fought with renewed determination. Battles that had seemed hopeless suddenly became winnable. The Valorian advance slowed, then stopped, and then began to reverse within 2 years of the Battle of Kestrel 4. The Valorian Empire sued for peace. The war that had threatened to destroy humanity's colonies was over, and historians would later point to Lucy's stand as the turning point. She became a symbol, a legend, a name that parents told their children when they wanted to teach them about courage and sacrifice. But Lucy Grant never wanted to be a symbol. When she finally recovered enough to leave the hospital, she found a galaxy that worshipped her as a hero. Her face was on recruitment posters and news broadcasts, and even children's toys. People stopped her on the street to ask for pictures and autographs. Politicians wanted her to speak at their rallies, and military leaders wanted her to inspire their troops. Lucy hated all of it. She had not destroyed the Titan to become famous. She had done it to save those children, those families, those innocent people who had no one else to protect them. The fame felt like a lie, like people were celebrating a version of her that did not really exist. They saw a fearless warrior who had laughed in the face of death. She saw a terrified woman who had simply done what needed to be done and had been lucky enough to survive. The nightmares came every night. Memories of fire and pain, and the faces of friends who had not made it. She could not sleep without seeing Captain Brooks fall, without hearing the screams of the wounded, without feeling the heat of the explosions that had nearly killed her. The Terran Defense Force offered her promotions and command positions. They wanted to make her a symbol of human strength, a living recruitment poster. Lucy refused everything. "I appreciate the honor," she told Admiral Lawson when he offered her a captain's commission, "but I am not the person you think I am." She requested an honorable discharge, and after much argument, the military granted her request. Lucy Grant, the giant killer, the hero of Kestrel 4, quietly disappeared from public life. She changed her appearance, cutting her hair short and avoiding the distinctive style she had worn during the war. She moved to Nexus Prime, a busy trade station where thousands of humans and aliens passed through every day. She applied for a job as a cargo inspector, a simple position that required no fame and attracted no attention. Her supervisor, a tired man named Gerald, had looked at her application with confusion. "You are overqualified for this job," he said. "You could do something much more important." Lucy had simply smiled. "I have done important things," she replied. "Now I would like to do something peaceful." Gerald shrugged and hired her on the spot for 3 years. Lucy worked at Inspection Station 7, checking manifests and verifying cargo. She made friends with her coworkers, including a young man named Danny, who reminded her of the Marines she had served with. She found a small apartment near the station and adopted a cat named Pepper, who slept on her pillow every night. The nightmares never fully went away, but they became less frequent as the years passed. She was almost happy. The old Vandari merchant finished his story and looked at his assistant. "And now you understand why I was so shocked to see her here," he said. "The human that Krellian fool just insulted is the same woman who destroyed a Titan with her bare hands." His assistant stared at Lucy with new eyes. "She does not look like a legend," she said softly. The merchant laughed quietly. "That is the thing about humans," he replied. "They never look like what they really are, and their size tells you nothing about the strength inside them." Across the cargo bay, Commander Varax continued to glare at Lucy. As she worked through his manifest, he had no idea that the tiny woman before him had accomplished something that entire Krellian battle fleets could not have done. He had no idea that he had just insulted the most dangerous human in the galaxy, but he was about to find out. Commander Varax stood with his arms crossed over his massive chest, watching the tiny human woman work through his cargo manifest with growing impatience. His soldiers stood behind him in rigid formation, their golden eyes fixed straight ahead as they waited for their commander's orders. The other aliens in the cargo bay had returned to their business, though May still cast curious glances at the scene unfolding at Inspection Station 7. Lucy continued her work with calm efficiency, scanning each item on the manifest and cross-referencing it with the actual cargo on the hover platform. She did not rush despite Varax's obvious irritation, and she did not make mistakes despite his earlier insults. Danny watched from his nearby station, still angry about how the Krellian had treated his co-worker and friend. He had known Lucy for 6 months, and in all that time, he had never seen her lose her temper or raise her voice. She was the quietest person on the dock crew, always willing to help but never seeking attention. Could not understand how she remained so calm in the face of such disrespect. One of the Krellian soldiers, a younger warrior with lighter scales than his commander, pulled out a datapad and began typing. Rapidly, he was searching for information about the human who had dared to stand firm against Commander Varax. What he found made his scales turn pale. The young soldier hurried forward and leaned close to Varax, whispering urgently in the Krellian language. Varax's expression shifted from impatience to confusion, then from confusion to disbelief. "That is impossible," he said sharply. "You must be mistaken." The soldier shook his head and held up his datapad, showing Varax the screen. Cargo bay had grown quiet again as everyone noticed the change in the Krellian commander's demeanor. Lucy continued working, apparently unaware of the conversation happening right in front of her. But Danny saw her eyes flick briefly toward Varax, and he could have sworn he saw the faintest hint of a smile on her lips. Varax read the information on the datapad slowly, his golden eyes growing wider with each sentence. The datapad showed news articles from 5 years ago, military reports, and a famous photograph of a small human woman standing in front of a collapsed Titan-class war machine. The woman in the photograph was younger and more scarred, but she was unmistakably the same person who now stood before him checking his cargo manifest. Commander Varax had spent his entire life studying warfare and military history, knew about the Battle of Kestrel. Every military officer in the galaxy knew about the Battle of Kestrel. It was taught in war colleges across 100 worlds as an example of impossible courage and tactical genius, and the hero of that battle, the tiny human who had single-handedly destroyed an unstoppable war machine, was standing right in front of Him, the same woman he had just called an insect, the same woman he had mocked for her size, the same woman he had threatened to crush beneath his foot. Vorax felt something he had not felt in decades, something the Krellian warriors were trained from birth to suppress and deny. He felt fervent fear of physical harm, for even now he knew he could overpower this small human in direct combat, but fear of shame, fear of dishonor, fear of what his mockery revealed about his own blindness and arrogance among the Krellian people. There was no greater disgrace than insulting a true warrior, and there was no greater warrior in the galaxy than the woman who had stood alone against a Titan. Lucy finished her inspection and looked up at Commander. "Vorax, your cargo is approved," she said in that same steady voice. "You may proceed to Docking Bay 17 for departure." She held out the manifest pad. Vorax did not take it. Instead, he stood frozen, his massive form completely still as he struggled to find the right words. The entire cargo bay was watching now. Aliens of every species staring at the strange scene. Even his own soldiers looked uncertain, unsure of what their commander would do. Lucy simply waited, her arm extended, her expression unchanged. Finally, Vorax moved. He stepped back from Lucy and lowered himself to one knee, his massive form folding down until his head was level with hers. Then he crossed his arms over his chest in the ancient Krellian gesture of ultimate respect, the salute that warriors gave only to those they considered their equals or superiors. The cargo bay erupted in shocked whisper. Krellian commanders did not kneel to anyone, not to admirals, not to kings, not to anyone except the greatest warriors in the galaxy. "Sergeant Lucy Grant," Vorax said in a voice that carried across the entire bay. "Giant killer of Kestrel 4, savior of the 2000. He paused, his golden eyes meeting her quiet brown ones. "I spoke in ignorance, and I judged in blindness," he continued. "I saw only your size and not your spirit, only your body and not your heart." He bowed his head. "I offer my deepest apologies and my highest respect," he said. "You are a warrior without equal, and I am honored to stand in your presence." The silence in the cargo bay was absolute. Lucy looked at the kneeling Krellian commander for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she stepped forward and placed her small hand on his massive shoulder. "Get up, Commander," she said gently. "You have cargo to deliver, and I have more manifests to check." Vorax rose slowly, his eyes still fixed on her face. "How can you be so calm?" he asked quietly. "I insulted you terribly." Lucy shrugged. "I have been called worse things by bigger enemies," she replied. "And I learned long ago that true strength has nothing to do with size." She handed him the manifest pad. "Safe travels, Commander." Vorax took the pad and bowed his head once more, then turned and walked away with his soldiers following in stunned silence. The aliens in the cargo bay parted before him like water before a ship, their eyes still fixed on the small human woman. At Inspection Station 7, Danny rushed over to Lucy as soon as the Krellians were gone. "What just happened?" he demanded. "Why did he kneel to you? What is the giant killer of Kestrel 4? Lucy sighed softly and turned back to her workstation. "It is a long story," she said, "and it was a long time ago. But Lucy, the cargo will not inspect itself." Danny, the old Vandari merchant, approached before Danny could say more, his four eyes bright with admiration. "Miss Grant," he said respectfully, "I saw what you did 5 years ago, and I have never forgotten it." Lucy looked at him with those quiet eyes. "Most people have forgotten," she said, "and that is how I prefer it." The merchant nodded in understanding. "Then I will keep your secret," he promised. "But please know that there are many beings across this galaxy who owe you their gratitude." Lucy smiled, a small and tired smile that held old pain and quiet acceptance. "I did not do it for gratitude," she said. "I did it because it needed to be done." She turned back to her workstation and picked up her scanner. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have work to do." The merchant bowed and walked away. Leaving Lucy alone in her inspection station, Danny stood beside her, looking at his coworker with new eyes. Seeing her for the first time as the galaxy saw her. "You really destroyed a Titan-class war machine?" he asked softly. Lucy did not look up from her work. "Like I said," she replied. "It was a long time ago." She scanned another manifest and approved another shipment. Just another day at Nexus Prime. Just another day in the quiet life of the smallest giant the galaxy had ever known.